So thanks for joining us, everyone, to our webinar today on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grants for fiscal year 2024, which for us runs from July 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2024. I am Carolyn Koska. I'm the Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, and we'll just start and run through what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk just briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. We'll look at the guidelines for this grant program. We'll go over to our website and look at what resources are available for you there. Then we will go into our grant system and walk through the application. And we will finish up talking about our grant process, or what happens after you submit an application. I will ask everybody, for the most part, to keep muted today. We'll stop a couple times for questions where you can unmute and ask those questions. Also, feel free to type questions in the chat at any time. Again, thanks for sharing a little information about yourselves in the chat as well. And then at the end, if we've got some time, we'll open things up and we can talk some more about your specific projects. So the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. Here is our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota and work to get the state arts funding out into all of those nooks and crannies. So unsurprisingly, the majority of our funding does come from the state of Minnesota. We have an allocation from their general fund, but the majority of the state funds come from the Arts and Cultural Heritage, or Legacy Fund. We also get some funding from the McKnight Foundation that we use for our grants for artists, along with some memberships and donations from around our region. To be a little more specific about our region, applicant organizations need to be located within either these 18 counties, which include Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-Oparle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, but also two tribal nations, Pajutazeze Upper Sioux Community and Chanchayape Lower Sioux Community. And we acknowledge that the SMOC region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. So our equipment and facilities improvement grants are open to a couple different kinds of organizations. First of all, arts organizations, those nonprofits that are focused primarily on the arts. Also open to other nonprofit organizations who have their 501c3 and have arts needs, even though that may not be their main organization focus, and also units of government that may have arts needs. And these, for purposes of this grant, are defined as city, county, or tribal government. Schools do not count as units of government for this grant. They are not eligible for this program. If your organization is basically operating in the spirit of a nonprofit but does not have its 501c3 status yet, you can apply using a fiscal sponsor, which is an organization that does meet the eligibility criteria that we have, and they will agree to receive your funds for you and be ultimately responsible for the project. If you are going that route in your application, you will need an agreement with that fiscal sponsor organization that spells out the relationship between your two organizations, how our bill's going to get paid, who's responsible for what, and then you'll also need a signature on the application from someone from that fiscal sponsor organization. And you'll find there's a sample agreement in the application as well, and I'll point that out when we look over there. So we're hoping that these grants will strengthen mostly arts organizations' capacity to serve the arts needs of their communities. And there are all different kinds of things that you could do under this grant program. I'm going to be listing some things that we've seen come through as requests before, but as it says, projects may include but are not limited to. So it could be things like sound and lighting equipment, theater curtains, rigging, trapdoors, dance floors, risers, instruments, kilns, or other studio equipment if you're giving arts classes, different kinds of storage, office-related things, or these could also be art-related things, depending on what you're doing: computers, tablets, printers, software, chairs and tables, office furniture, and then different kinds of structural improvements. We've had people improve bathrooms, put in a new elevator, replace windows and doors, do accessibility improvements, add some signage, things like that. So you have a lot of options under this program. If your organization does not own the space that it uses, you will need to have a cooperative agreement with the owner of that space just to make sure that you will have access to this equipment or improvements that you're doing. So it would cover things like who actually does have access to this equipment, who can use it, are other users of this space allowed to use your equipment or not? What happens if your organization moves to a new location? Just some different things to consider to make sure that since this grant is going to you, that you are going to have access to the equipment or improvements that you receive from that. So this would also be attached to your application. So this grant is available for up to $10,000. And in this current year, no matching funds are required for that, which means that as long as your project costs are within the amount that this max amount that you can request, your organization does not need to come up with or find any other funding toward the project. But a couple funding limits to be aware of. Applicants can only receive up to $50,000 under this program within a rolling 10-year time frame. So if you're getting quite a few of these grants, after a while, you'll have to stop and take a break until it's been a while. And then you can apply again. And we kind of keep track of this for you and can give you a heads up if you are getting close to that limit. And then overall, with all of our programs, we have a $20,000 limit per year in SMOC grant funds. This does not count operating support, but across all of our other programs during the year, you can receive a maximum of $20,000. So if you applied for a full $10,000 equipment grant, that would be take up half of the max that you could request from us in the year. Some other things to be aware of for eligibility. These are all things that are not eligible for these grants. New construction or purchase of real estate, activities of a for-profit project, organization, or business, a project that doesn't have an art focus ultimately, educational projects within a school system, activities that take place outside of Minnesota. We are using state funds here. Probably not something you're going to need to worry about with this equipment and facilities grant. Fundraising events are also not eligible. The grant should allow your project to break even, not to make a profit on top of that. So for instance, with these equipment grants, if you end up getting a whole bunch more donations toward the project than you're expecting, that might affect how much funding you are able to receive from us. Also, if you are already receiving operating support from us, you can't include prorated operating type costs in this budget. A couple more ineligible things: payments of debts incurred before your grant begins, these grant funds being used to match another SMOC grant project, or if your organization has a past due final report still hanging out there somewhere. So we've got one deadline per year for this program, and that is a change this year. We had previously had a couple, but we're trying to consolidate that a little bit. So the deadline is coming up on January 31st, and you can start your project as early as March 1st. And a reminder for the deadline that you need to submit your application by 4:30 p.m. on that date. So you saw that start date that we talked about earlier. That was that March date. So you can't start any project activities before that date, which means no buying anything. So no purchasing supplies, no paying anybody, and it also means no advertising anything. So everything kind of has to wait until that earliest start date. And then you'll also need to choose an end date for yourself. You can go out if you want as far as June 30th of 2025. It's a good idea to give yourself time to complete and evaluate the project. So allow time not just to say purchase the item, but give yourself time to try it out, maybe have it involved in one of your productions so that you're able to evaluate how this has helped you. There are two people that you'll need to have connected to your application. One is the project director, and this is whoever is going to be most directly responsible for the day-to-day goings-on of the project. And then you'll need an authorizing official, and this will be somebody who has authorizing power for your organization, like a treasurer, president. These do need to be two different people, and both will need to sign all of your grant-related documents, including the application. And we'll pause here for a second for questions. I think I saw something coming in on the chat. The question is, does no government units mean that our Arts Council's committee called Ortonville School Friends of the Arts would not qualify for this grant? I've heard a little bit about this project because this is for school building and activities. That is correct. That would not be an eligible project.
Would there never be any other type of grant then that could be used for the school theater?
There really are no funds available for equipment and facilities for schools. The only thing would be if you were doing a school residency and you needed some very small piece of equipment for that specific residency that you were doing. Otherwise, there really is no funding for equipment or facilities things for schools. The only other option is if there's a community organization that are really heavy users of, say, a school auditorium. So if you had a really active community theater group and the school auditorium is their home, they could apply for things that they needed and they would live in that school facility. But it really would be focused on what does this community organization need.
Okay. Thanks, Carolyn.
Yep.
Carolyn, Cultural Center in Bird Island, have a question.
Sure.
Our boiler, it's about maybe 15 years old, and we've had trouble. It'll be shutting down sometime when we're not, sometimes when we're not here. And we had an expansion tank that needed to be replaced. And when it was replaced, come to find out that the piping system is all full of sludge and really needs to be flushed. And we've got a check valve that's acting up too, probably for the same reason. The cost is anywhere from like maybe $1,200, $1,500 to flush it out and change the check valve. Is that something that would be allowable?
If you can show the arts need, I mean, if that's necessary to be in the building, which sounds like it is, I actually might suggest with that amount that you're looking at one of the quick support grants instead.
Oh, 2,500?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Pop up.
Those are the monthly deadlines. So the next deadline for that would be January 1st, and you'd find out by the end of January.
Oh, okay.
Carolyn,
Mhm.
we had ice dams, and in the gallery, I had some leakage. Would the painting of the ceiling and the repair of the wall qualify?
Yeah. I mean, if you're ending up having multiple smaller things that might build up into a larger amount, you could decide if the full equipment and facilities grant makes more sense.
And then I have one more question.
Okay.
I really love the appearance of our website, but it appears that the consumers are getting lost in the technicalities of it. Would the website improvement, would that qualify?
That one
Under-
also, I think, would fit better under the quick support under an organization development project type, I think.
Okay.
Other questions at the moment?
I just have a quick question. I'm with the Hutchinson Theater Company,
Okay.
and I'm wondering, we've been kind of taking a break. This last year was our first year back in production, and so we have quite a bit of catch up to do. I'm wondering if this grant for the facilities and equipment can be split up in various projects.
Sure. Yeah. If you have different areas that you're covering, it does make more sense to put them all into one request. This is definitely the one to throw it all in there.
Wonderful.
Well, I think we are going to move on and take a look at our website, and we can sure come back to some more questions in a bit. Here is our website. And everything that you need is going to be all under this grants tab, including at the very top, login to our grant system. We're going to save that for a second though, and we're going to look at the equipment and facilities grants. So we went to our grants for organizations. Here are our equipment and facilities grants. And right at the top here, we've got our guidelines. Make sure to read these. They've got some more information. We didn't quite cover every last detail, so lots to look at here. Make sure to read that. We've got all of the important dates related to this round of applications. When you come back here, maybe this time next week, instead of this register for workshop, it'll have a video of today's workshop that you can take a look at again. And then down at the bottom, we've got some documents linked. For instance, we have the application questions in a Word document. Some people like to work in that first and then paste into the grant system later. We've even got the final report questions here if you want to heads up of what you're getting into with your reporting. So that's where to find some additional information on these grants. I'll also point out our grants help pages. This workshops and assistance page has basically all of the ways that you can get any sort of help with your application. We talk about our open office hours, some grant sessions that we have either in person or virtually coming up. You can grab a time on my calendar here and choose how you want to meet, whether that's by phone or Zoom or in person. And then we've got all of the rest of our grant workshops listed here. We're just about done for our year. We just have one left. And then we've got videos from our past workshops here for the year. So you can, this will be another spot where you can find the video from today that will be posted here as well. And then one more page on the website, this credits and resources page is where you can find all of the credit lines and logos that you might need to use. We'll specify which ones those are for you in your contract. You can look at a sample contract, that sample fiscal sponsor agreement, sample facility agreement, and some access resources. So some more helpful links for you there. And we are now going to jump into our grant system. So we're going to follow that login link. If you already have an account in the system, you would just log in. If you are totally new, you can create a new account here. If you're not sure whether you or someone from your organization already has an account in the system, just contact us and we can get that figured out for you. But I'm going to go ahead and log in here. Oops. If you have ever acted as a grant reviewer or panelist for us, be aware that it goes to that screen first and you need to change your role to applicant. So here we are on our applicant dashboard. And if you're coming into the system for the first time, it'll actually take you directly to this apply page. And it's got all of the open grant applications here, and you can scroll through. Here's our equipment and facilities improvement. If you want to just preview, there's this button here. You can take a look at it without actually starting anything. Otherwise, there's this apply button when you're ready to get started. That's what we're going to do. And here is our application. I'm going to point out a couple buttons at the top. If you need to work in another language, we have Google Translate embedded into the site. You can choose your language and it'll translate the interface and all the questions into that language for you. We have the copy previous answers button. If you have done an application in the system before, you can choose to copy answers from that application over into this one for anything that's the same between the two. There's also the collaborate button, and this is where you can invite someone else to work on the application with you. You'd put in their email address, choose what level of permission you want to give them, and send them a little message saying whatever it is you'd like them to do, whether you want them to just proof things or add in some numbers or attachments or sign the application. You would just invite them. They'll get an email and a link and just need to create a password if they don't already have an account in the system, and that will allow them to come in here and also work on the application. So you start out with a name for your project, as you see by the examples. Just very basic is fine, explaining what it is you're doing. You'll stick in the amount that you're requesting, though you'll probably want to wait to fill that in until after you've done your budget form. We've got guidelines and criteria linked here again, along with some tips. And then you'll start out describing your project. What is it that you are wanting to either purchase or make improvements on? If you're working with somebody like a contractor, why did you choose them? What are their qualifications? Who from your organization is going to be involved in the project? And then what is your project schedule? Next, we have a couple upload fields. If there's any extra material that you want to provide, maybe you want to provide some photos of the space, some sort of technical diagram, specs about particular bits of equipment. There's some room for you there. Then here's where you would put, if you need to do that facility agreement. Again, there's a sample one here for you to look at. And then you'll choose your start and end date for the project, and it does remind you the earliest and latest you could be. Next is the budget section. We have an Excel budget form for you here. You can choose to use something else if you like, but this, if you are able to use this Excel one, it does do some calculations for you that can be really helpful. So up here, you can put your either organization name, project name, and then just start typing in expenses that you have, and we'll throw some amounts in here. So you'll see it's adding up for us. And let's say we had some donations for this project. So then it calculates for us, our request cannot exceed the cash cost, which was up here, minus the other funding. And it came up with $7,000 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, whichever is less. So our equipment and facilities was 10,000, 7,000 is less than 10,000. So we can request our $7,000. But let's say our project is a bit more expensive. And now this says our request cannot exceed 11,000 or the max, whichever is less. So this time, the maximum request amount of 10,000 is less. So that's how much we can request. But now you'll see down here, our profit is a minus $1,000, and we need to do something about that. And in this case, that means we need to come up with another $1,000 of income for the project. And now our profit equals 0, which is our goal of the budget form. So once you fill this out, you can save it and then upload that here. We have a budget narrative field. If you've got any details that you want to provide that didn't really fit into that spreadsheet format, you can provide that here. Then we just want some information about your organization, mission statement, brief history, who do you serve, what kind of support do you receive from the community, some information about your board, including a list of members and their roles and qualifications. We also want you to talk about your arts programming that you're doing. How do you make artistic choices in after you've detailed what that programming is? How do you hire your artists? How do you make sure that your projects have potential for participants and audience to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding in the arts? So make sure to provide plenty of detail here. As we will look at the criteria later, that's an important part that is considered. Then we ask you to think about who might be underserved or underrepresented in your community. It could be groups that are based on race or ethnicity, language, socioeconomic level, sexual orientation, ability, etc. So just kind of think about your community and who might not be being served by your organization and community. If you need to find out a little bit more about your community, this Minnesota Compass site is really helpful. It has a little more information that you might find in just the regular census. Let's see, put in a town here. And it's got all kinds of information, things about age, race and ethnicity. I'll point out these places where it says suppressed is nothing to worry about. It just means it's either a really small number and they don't want specific people to be identified, or there's a larger margin of error. So nothing to worry about here, but we do see that these must make up a kind of significant percentage based on our totals here. You can look at things about disability, and then it even goes into things like transportation, what do people generally have available to them. So it's a lot of good information to help you consider your community. So once you've thought about who in your community might be underserved or underrepresented, we ask you to choose one or more of those groups that you came up with and figure out some specific ways that you can make sure they're able to participate in your activities. And with this grant, we're asking about, in general, what does your organization do, not how do they need to be specifically involved in this equipment request. But a reminder that saying our activities are open to everyone does not really answer this question. We are really looking for specific things that you are doing The most important of those, which is including members of that group in your planning to find out what they want or need. Maybe you're translating some materials, maybe you're providing transportation or childcare. There's all kinds of options of things that you could be doing, but we really need you to talk about specific things that you are doing. And we also realize your organization may already consist of members of this group and primarily be serving them already. And there's some space to explain that as well. And finally, talk about how you generally ensure that your activities are accessible to those with various types of disabilities. And if you have an ADA access plan, how does that inform the planning for your programming? Then we are looking at the impact of the project. You'll be asked to come up with some goals and think about what changes to skills, knowledge, attitude, or behavior of participants, audiences, or artists are you hoping for? And which specific programs or events will benefit. And we're asking you to think beyond the actual acquiring of equipment or improvement taking place. And what will that bring about for you to have this thing? So you'll need to figure out a way to measure or prove that those changes have taken place, some way to gather results or feedback, and then what you might look for. So an example, if you're getting a new sound system for your theater, your goal would not be to get the new sound system. Your goal might be, we want to improve audio so that people who have been hard of hearing have a much easier time as one of the things that you're looking for. So in that case, you need to have a production happen so that people can experience what that is like. And then maybe they fill out a survey, which is how you would gather results. And then you'd look in the survey and say, we want to find at least X% of people say they have increased improvement in hearing our productions. Even with things like if you're getting a new computer, try to think beyond getting the actual physical computer and what is this computer going to do for you? Is there a way that you can show it's saving you time? Is there a way you can show you're producing improved marketing materials, things like that? So there is a spot to upload some kind of evaluation tool that you have if you have some sort of survey or interview questions, things like that. And then these audience numbers can be a little difficult. Again, we are asking you to think beyond maybe the actual installation of the thing, and think maybe what's a production's worth of people who have experienced this, or even out to how many might experience this in a year. Then we just have some data collection. These don't really have any bearing on your application, just some things that we need to collect and pass on to the state and to our lobbying organization, Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. It asks what your most recently completed fiscal year was. You can choose whether you are an organization or non-arts organization. Arts organizations will put their total expenses for that year that they talked about up here. Non-arts will put their total arts expenses that they estimated they had during that year. Some demographics about your organization and audiences, total audience served within a year. And then we just ask for a little feedback about what different ways of getting assistance from us you've used. Then is just some contact information. We've got your project director, your authorizing official, who was the grant writer in case we have some questions. If you are using a fiscal sponsor and choose yes here, that those blanks will appear for you to fill in, along with here's that spot for your fiscal sponsor agreement. And then we've got some signatures at the end. You can just type in, they would each type in their names there. So you could use the collaborate button to invite, say, your fiscal sponsor authorizing official to come in here and sign. Down at the bottom, we've got our couple buttons here. There's submit for when we're ready. There's also save application. This will be auto saving as you're working away on here. But if you do click the actual save application button, it'll bring up a list of the required fields that you still need to complete so you can kind of track your progress. And to continue, you would click continue to go back and keep working. But we're going to head back over to our dashboard. And you can see now here is this application that we just started. And to return and keep working, you can just click edit application and go back in there and keep working. And this will be the same place. You'll come back if you're awarded a grant. As you can see in this one, a contract is there, report is there. So this will just be your hub for all grant things. I'm going to head back over to our slides for a second and see if there are any more questions at the moment.
Yeah, I had a question about, so with the Hutchinson Theater Company, each of our shows is at a different location that we rent. So we don't really have a home space. So when we're doing that facility cooperative agreement, do we need to think about like all of the various spaces that we may be using in the upcoming like year or two?
Or your most regularly used spaces.
Okay.
And you may also want to, just for yourselves, if you're not really permanently in a space, where is this stuff living?
Okay, so yeah, because we have an agreement and we have some storage in the arts center in town. So
okay,
could we use that as our main facility?
Yeah, I think that would be good, and have that agreement about you have storage here.
Okay, perfect.
All right, I think we will keep moving on for the moment, but as I said at the end, we can open things up if there's anything else you want to talk about specific projects. So some tips as you are working on your application, thinking ahead to choose the best timing for your project, making sure that there's enough time around when that start date is to be able to do what you need to do. Make sure that you read the guidelines and criteria carefully. We looked at where those were available. We'll talk about criteria a little more in a minute. Also, always good to start working on your application earlier than you think you need to. There might be lots of pieces that you're pulling from different places to track down, or you might have questions, so give yourself plenty of time. You'll also have seen in the application, a lot of the questions had multiple bullet points to it, so make sure you are covering all of those. No need to use any fancy grant language as you are writing this. Just keep your answers nice and clear and concise. You can use everyday language. It's also good to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about your project or your organization, so be careful about using acronyms without explaining what they are, or referring to projects without explaining. Just pretend you're introducing your organization to a totally new person. And finally, don't hesitate to contact us. We are really here to help you in the process. And some ways to do that include, you can certainly talk with us about your project before you're even getting started, and we can make sure you're in the right grant program, that things are eligible, and get some of those questions answered. Also, as you're working on the application and you have any questions, feel free to contact us about those. And finally, we are actually able to review a draft of your application before you submit it. If you let us know about 2 weeks before the deadline that you have a draft ready, we can go in there and look and let you know if there's anything that you're missing or something that might sound a little confusing. And we can just give you some suggestions on that. That is really helpful to take advantage of if you, another reason to start your application early enough so that you have time to get that draft review. After you submit your application, the first thing that happens is staff will review it for eligibility and completeness. And if at that stage we find something missing or some eligibility concern, we'll contact you and you'll have 48 hours to remedy whatever that is. And then from that point, that's staff's kind of last connection with your application. We don't have any say over what gets funded or not. We're really just here as your advocates in coming up with the best application that you can have. So at that point, the round of applications will get passed on to a panel of individuals from around our region, and they will read them all, score them, discuss them based on the criteria for this program, which again, we'll look at in a second. And then their scores go on to our board of directors who make the final funding decisions. So the criteria for this project, they'll be looking at the feasibility of the project, and that is worth 15% of your score. They will be looking at the merit of your organization and the artistic quality of its programs, worth 32% of your score. And finally, the impact that this will have on your organization, worth 53% of your score. And if you go either on our website or within the application into some of those other materials and look at the criteria document, it does go into much more detail under each of these points. So you really get a good idea of what you will be scored on. We also have, after the panel have completed their review and we have their score, before it goes to the board, there's a chance for you to have a couple extra percentage points added to your score if you meet any of these criteria. If you are a first-time applicant to us, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are from a county that hasn't received as much funding from us recently. So you could have up to 3 percentage points added to your score if you meet any of these criteria. If your grant is awarded, you'll have to complete a contract, again, with all those same signers on it. And then we will issue your award to you after we have received that contract. You'll need to acknowledge the grant on any publicity or marketing that you're doing. This is a little different with this kind of grant. Sometimes people will maybe put a credit sticker on a piece of equipment that they've purchased, and then people kind of see that as they use that. Maybe that you're doing a local article about the project. So in that case, the credit line and possibly this Minnesota Legacy logo would need to be used. And with your award letter and in your contract, all of those credit materials and information will be sent to you so you will know what you need to use. No guessing. If, as your project is in progress, you find things aren't going as planned and you might need to make some changes, please contact us. We could possibly do things like extend your project end date, approve some changes to your budget. Maybe you weren't able to get a certain item that you were planning on, and we can help you figure out something else in the spirit of the request that you could get instead. So just if something starts going not as planned, contact us and we can help you figure that out. We understand that things change. And finally, you'll need to do a report. You'll have 60 days after the project end date that you've chosen to get that in. But I do suggest as you're getting started on your project, make sure to take a look at that report so you know what kinds of information you'll need to be gathering. And that is all of the material that I needed to cover today. So again, I will open things up if there's anything that anyone wanted to talk about, more about a specific project.
I had a question, Carolyn.
Sure.
We're also doing quite a bit with print flyers and those kinds of things and in color. And I'm wondering, having been in larger organizations that have color printers and a contract with a service agency, typically there's less cost in print. Is that something that would be an equipment kind that might be feasible for our size organization?
Yes, that would be something you could request.
Okay.
Oh, Carolyn,
Go ahead.
when we have people with disabilities, there's a group who comes in to the center monthly to look at the art. Should I be designating them as a service that we're providing them? Should I be documenting the number of time? I document that every time they visit, but I don't designate in my documentation that they are challenged in any way. Should I be doing that?
There is in the report more specific categories that are asked about as far as audience members, things like disability, veteran. I'm not getting them all off the top of my head, but it would be helpful to have numbers that you can plug into that on the report end. But also if these are a regular visitor, to possibly have them as one of your groups that you're focusing on for specific services to help them participate as well.
I didn't separate them out from the rest of the consumers, but maybe I can subtly figure out something. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm going to share my screen again here. And I'm going to pull up what that final report question looks like. And you can see the kinds of things that you can be collecting. So at the end, they're asking one population benefited by race or ethnicity, and they've got choices. They're looking for people that might have made up 25% or more of your audience. They're looking at population benefited by distinct groups. So here's that list here of people that you could be thinking about counting a little more. And I believe they also have, I skipped this one over here. They also have by age. So those might be some things to think about, to be paying attention to with who's coming in as your audience. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, Carolyn, this is Jackie with the City of Slayton. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so looking at repairs to our band shell, specifically focusing on the roof and looking at applying as fiscal sponsor for our community band. I'm wondering if you can kind of point me in the right directions for the goals and how we would measure them. They do a concert series in the park. I believe it's 8 weeks in the summer. There's every Wednesday night, they have a set of music and people just come for a certain amount of time. There's a Relay for Life team that does a fundraiser meal for each of those. I guess we could ask those teams to keep track, which they probably do, of how many meals they serve.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other suggestions on how to think about who we're better serving in that location and how to measure the results?
I would think about from the band perspective also, are they more comfortable with the new, like being in that space with the roof? I mean, were they having like leaking on them, or will it make the temperature more comfortable?
Improve their acoustics maybe. Yeah.
So
I don't,
I might check with the band,
yeah.
see what kinds of things they think this might help them with.
Yeah, I know that the community band has voiced concerns about the condition of it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you
And
know,
perhaps I don't know if they're concerned for safety, that things are going to start
right. Yes,
falling
because
on them. That would be a
it's
big
it's an all wood structure, so
uh
it's not like there is some safety concerns with some rotting wood and things.
Okay. So I think focusing on as one of your things, definitely comfort of the band using the space. So you definitely want to get feedback from band members comparing working in the new space versus working in the old space. All right. Well, since we are at 5 after already here, I think I will just thank you all for coming, and feel free to contact me going forward if you have any questions. And if there's anything we didn't get to today, I certainly am up for talking about that with you if you just send me an email or grab a time on my calendar. So thanks all for joining today, and have a good afternoon.